Welcome to G-Man Gaming and Reviews. Today's video is going to be a react video to a video by GINX TV called Total War Warhammer 3 is my newest obsession. The reason that I thought I would do a react video to this is because it has some interesting thoughts by a video game player who basically didn't play the Total War Warhammer series for almost a decade because of some misconceptions that they had about the game. And the misconceptions that the video that GINX TV had about this game was very interesting in terms of how it relates to video games in general. So I thought I would do a react video to this because it sparks some thoughts in me. So let's go ahead and do the reaction.
I never played Warhammer Total War. Any of them. That's my confession. 20-something years of playing strategy games, including the older Total Wars, and I somehow missed the boat on the biggest of the lot. Though, I decided it was time to fix that. Medieval 2 was my last entry, and after that, I fell off the series. The first Warhammer should have been enough to bring me back into the fold, but I guess I was busy in 2016. Then its sequel came out and I figured, I didn't play the first game, I'll skip it. Then, Warhammer 3, and I toyed with jumping in on it, but I wasn't ready to surrender my wallet to an ever-growing list of DLC. That holding out...
Yeah, I think that's... So as a player who started in Total War Warhammer 1, and I have literally purchased all the DLC for the Total Warhammer 2 and 3 series, and I haven't even played... I've played like almost over 1,000 hours, and I still haven't played every legendary lord. There's even some factions that I've barely played. So there is a lot of content here, especially if you combine it with the DLC. I think what they should do is they should do what they did with what I've seen with Stellaris, is rather than having to buy all the DLC, you can pay a monthly membership of like $20 a month to get access to all of it. Because I think somebody having to, at this point, because there's so much DLC, knowing what to buy when you're first starting out is just not something that I think the $20 membership would be better, because that way a person could play with everything and then decide what they want to purchase outright if that's what they want to do. And I think it would be good because it would give Creative Assembly like a steady income. But yeah, like having to buy all the DLC at this point would be very problematic.
Lasted until a few weeks ago, when I saw the game on sale, thought, sod it, let's see what the fuss is about, and gave it a whirl. This has been the fastest I have fallen headfirst into obsession with a game in a very long time. I had a...
Yeah, I get that. The thing is that the Warhammer Fantasy setting has so many factions and so many different types of units in game that it's just insane. Like, this is why even before I started playing Total War Warhammer, I was already a Warhammer Fantasy fan. Didn't like Age of Sigmar, right? But I absolutely love the Warhammer Fantasy setting. Is absolutely awesome. It's one of the best fantasy settings that I've ever seen. As much as I love Lord of the Rings, and don't get me wrong, obviously Warhammer Fantasy built off Lord of the Rings. But Warhammer Fantasy, in my opinion, is the fantasy setting. There is no other fantasy setting that is as fleshed out as Warhammer Fantasy.
A lot of misconceptions before playing, and went into my first campaigns as fodder, standing still in a noob box and turning close victories into decisive defeats. After getting chewed up, stomped on, and poked by a million pointy sticks, I managed to bag my first very hard campaign win, opening the door to a wider game. I would be kicking 2016 me for not getting in on the action back then, but I'd rather look forward to what I know will be a lengthy and probably quite expensive obsession. Any new players also late to the party thinking about getting into the IP, hopefully you learn a little something from my journey. And veterans of the franchise rejoice in knowing that another player has entered the fold, one who is all too ready to receive your wise words and sagely advice. But first, you might be wondering why I was so adamant on not playing the franchise in the first place. Shogun, Rome, and Medieval 1 and 2 were formative games for me, and I even collected Warhammer Fantasy miniatures way back when. This should have been the perfect match. But since ignoring the first game and skirting the second, I realized I had built up quite a list of reasons to not play the game, and in retrospect, a lot of them are completely unfounded. I built up an imaginary hill, and I was ready to die on it. So back in the day, the first Total War entries were big ones for me, but then I moved into 4X territory. Civilization, Age of Wonders, the Endless series, that sort of thing. I loved the idea of exploring the map and never knowing what I'll find, which ended up pushing me away from Total War given the world is always the same.
Yeah, so the GINX TV is going to talk about this in more detail later on, but this was one of the main points. So you would normally think that because the Total War Warhammer 3 series, that the map is always the same, that your gameplay is always going to be the same, but it's not, because every single faction, it has its own sort of part of the map that's unique to all the other parts for the most part. So as a result of that, it makes the gameplay, your scenario quite different. I've played games before where, very recently I was playing as the Vampire Counts, and I was playing as Vlad, and in one game, the ogres declared war on me first, a bit late into the campaign, and then when I had to restart the campaign again because Karl Franz was destroying me, Elspeth started, which is a necromancer character for the Empire, started to attack me early on. So the thing is that because the map is so large in this game, right? And because all the factions are very different from each other, and even within the same faction, you have legendary lords with unique mechanics. So what that means is that where you might have a misconception that the game is always going to be the same when you play, because the map is always the same. That's just simply not the case with Warhammer 3. Now, the other thing is that there are games that are procedurally generated, but just because a game has a procedurally generated map does not necessarily mean the map is going to be that unique. So, a game that I can think of off the top of my head is Warhammer 40k Gladius, Relic of War. Now, I do like that game, right? And it does have a procedurally generated map, right? But the thing is, a procedurally generated map is only good if there's a lot of different things that you can encounter, right? So a game that I think of that has an incredible procedurally generated map is Conquest of Elysium 5. Because of the sheer amount of units in the game and the sheer amount of terrain that you can run into in that game, and the fact that the game has multiple planes, each map does feel unique. But just because a game has a procedure, so in Conquest of Elysium 5's case, yes, every map feels unique. But in the case of, say, a game like Warhammer 40k Gladius, even though it is procedurally generated, there's just not that enough different types of terrain and units that you can run into to make the map itself interesting. I don't play that game because it's procedurally generated. I play that game to play as the factions, right? So I get where GINX TV is coming from, but it's not always the case that if a game is and I get that, because if you're coming from a 4X background, they often do have procedurally generated maps, especially if you're talking about the Civ series. But just because a game has a procedurally generated map where it's unique each time, it doesn't necessarily mean that the map's going to be unique.
You've uncovered the map and seen it all, you go to another game, and then another. There is a finite limit on discovery. So that was the big one, but my personal anti-Total War propaganda was a long list. The empire building and economy side of the game, all very simple. The big draw is the battles, but I wasn't really bothered by those. I like an RTS, but much smaller and more deliberate, which is the antithesis of Total War. There's limited faction choice and customization, and once you've played a campaign, you've done it. Why go back? The replayability is nothing compared to a 4X. Now, I know some of you are cracking your knuckles and ready to type out a message calling me an idiot for having these opinions. But let me save you some time, cause I can say it myself. I was an idiot for building up those reasons not to play, because I was so stupidly wrong. First off, the map issues. Yeah, I'm not discovering a new map every time I play, but the world is so damn big and varied and interesting and compelling that I don't even care. Each campaign feels like it takes place in its own little realm with things going off in the distance, and certain events bring these worlds into contact, usually with violent consequences. In terms of faction choice, what I thought was limiting is actually mind-boggling. Everything I played felt so varied. I originally figured different lords would be a slight change of flavor, but they can turn the game on its head.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes Total War Warhammer series really good is the legendary lords. Even in the same factions, there are legendary lords that just have a completely different play style to the others. And they do completely change the way that that particular lord will play. Even if you look, say, for instance, like the Empire, you have the Hunts Marshal legendary lord. He just makes archers and huntsmen absolutely insane. Like, you can take an entire archer army with him and he can just decimate it. Whereas if you were, say, playing with another Empire faction, you wouldn't be able to do that. Elspeth buffs like cannons, and Elspeth buffs ranged units, and then you have Karl Franz, who has his own mechanic with the Empire, with his own Empire mechanic. So yeah, this is one. I think it's not just the maps, but I think it's the fact that the legendary lords are so different from each other, and not just that. Throughout the series, there have been changes and upgrades to the way each of the legendary lords functions for the most part. Like the way Karl Franz functioned in Total War Warhammer 1 is like completely different to the way he functions now. So I think that's one of the really good things about that, is that even within the same faction, because of the legendary lords are so now I am gonna preface this by saying that it's not always super strong. In terms of differences. Like, for instance, with, say, one of the factions that I've been playing recently is the Vampire Coast. Their legendary lords, I've played as two of them, or three of them, Salestra and Aranessa. They're not really that different from each other from what I noticed, just in terms of the units buffs they give. So, but for the most part, with a lot of the factions, though, there is big differences. Vampire Coast was only the one that I found that sort of didn't. But for the most part, like, with each of the factions, there's big differences with each of the legendary lords in each of the factions, there's big differences between them, which greatly changes your playstyle, because different legendary lords will benefit certain units, which sort of promotes you to play those units. So there's certain legendary lords that can make certain units so much better that they're actually really, really good. So the combination of the tech tree with each legendary lord, for the most part, has unique, and well, a lot of them have unique tech trees combined with unique tech trees, the research trees, and the settlement buildings means that. And the thing is there's always more settlement buildings that you can build, so you do have to make a choice, and there's a significant difference between playing on easy or on normal difficulty and playing on hard or playing on very hard. But, you know, as you start to play in the harder difficulties, you start to get control debuffs to your settlements, which prioritizes you to build control buildings, which gives you a less of a building slot to do other things. So the combination of the tech tree for each character, research trees, and as well as your heroes, means that you can end up having a very unique play style, even amongst the same faction.
When playing as Thorgrim, Belagar, or Thorak in their campaigns, I got completely different experiences, despite them all boiling down to being defense-heavy factions with a short temper. Oh, I didn't mean to say short. The replayability myth I'd made up also had no leg to stand on, as I found myself diving back into the same campaign again and again, trying to nail that opening, or take a different approach. You've got a goal to accomplish, but ultimately the world is your sandbox, and you can throw that to the wind and do whatever you want. And then there's the big one, battles. Something I had no interest in initially and felt forced to engage with. There's only so many times I can make a big box, and so many times I can watch that box get crumpled in. But the more I played, the more I learned, the more confident I got until I opened said box, and out came a fist. I don't know, I'm still new to this, I am not good at battle analogies. When that happened, my obsession level with this game increased even more, and I saw the individuality and uniqueness.
Yeah, I think that it's not just the, like, your battle strategy. Even in the same faction, your battle strategy will change based on the unit compositions in an army, and literally almost all the factions that I've played have got a very wide range of units. Obviously, certain factions have certain styles over each other. Like the dwarfs are defensive. So are the Cathay. But even amongst because of the large amount of unit composition, the fact of the matter is that you can have very different armies even in the same faction for the most part. So what that means is that like you're not always gonna have the same army, because you're not always going to be in a box, because your army composition is going to change depending on not just depending upon which faction you're playing, but also who you're fighting against. Like, for instance, when I'm playing as the Empire, I tend to have one army of a regular army consisting of infantry, ranged units, artillery, some knights, and then I'll have a secondary army which is consisting of fast moving units like either pistoliers, outriders, and knights, in order to come in as reinforcements. So the thing is, because of the large amount of unit variety in a game, even more than what I would say in other war games that I've played, it doesn't always boil down to being the same thing, because you can change it up for the most part by taking different units. Now, in the early game, you're sort of like limited in what units you can take, but once you get to the mid game, you've got a fair choice in army composition.
Of each faction beyond just campaign mechanics. And what's more, all these things, they weren't a slow crawl of realization over dozens of hours. Most of them were realized in my first campaign. It clicked into place without much resistance, and a lot of that is down to the learning curve. There's a lot there, but getting in and enjoying it doesn't take long. Comparing it to other grand strategy games, there's not much to get your head around. City management, diplomacy, army and hero management. There's layers there, but the basics are not difficult to grasp. The more finicky things are going to be lord and faction mechanics, but you're only tackling one of those at a time. So you get a broad base layer, and then you spend the rest of the time soaking in the remainder of the info. And
yeah, that's probably one of the really good things about the game, is the fact that this game, I know this is a commonly used trope where people will say, easy to pick, easy to learn, difficult to master, but I think this game really does capture that, because it is really relatively easy to learn. There isn't too many gotchas in terms of mechanics. You know, I mean, even how you have like the different rights and mechanics for each of the different factions, they're simple enough that you can grasp them. It's very clear, and it's not like other games like, say, Civ, where there's a lot of inbuilt mechanics that you need to understand. The mechanics are really simple, but because the mechanics are really simple, it makes it more of a pick up a play. But it feels refreshing each time, and it does feel there's a depth to it that you need to learn, but that getting your head around the initial parts of it is not that difficult.
granted, there's a lot of that. Units, opposing lords, other factions. Despite being comfortable in playing, you're always learning something new. And every hour that ticks by in each battle you fight, you are becoming better. You're improving in multiple different skill sets, and that in itself is very gratifying. And as you get more and more confident, you can dial up the difficulty, leaning towards the ultimate challenge, which is where I found myself after my first few campaigns. I picked a lord with a comfortable start, Miao Ying I'd seen recommended, and exercised my knowledge, only to get absolutely brutalized again and again and again. I'd play the first few turns and then get smashed by Snitch. I'd restart, change my focus, get smashed by Chaos. I'd try and balance both, and get smashed on all fronts. Each time, I'd go back, do it again, hoping something would change. Now that's a pretty textbook example of insanity, but I loved this. Every failure was an incremental step forward, a lesson learned, and while there wasn't much progress between attempts, over a few false starts I went from an impossible fight to sending Snitch packing, only to then get smashed by Harkon, but that's beside the point. The cycle of setting myself a goal, optimizing that opening play, trying a slightly different strategy each time, I found this so rewarding. My misconception earlier about the lack of replay.
Yeah, I'm going to say I've experienced something similar. Like, I experienced it with the Vampire Counts. I was 80 turns in, and then Carl Franz was just destroying me. And I was like, I was going to start again. But you would think that being forced to start again would be problematic. But in this game, it's not, because it gives you the opportunity to optimize your initial playthrough. Like, when I was playing as the Vampire Coast, I had a lot of money that I wasn't using. So probably should have used that to create buildings that advance corruption. But that's one of the things that I found about this game is that even when you lose, you still want to come back and play it and try again. It doesn't feel, I don't know, I can't, it's very hard to explain, but it doesn't feel impossible. It just feels like you made a mistake and you need to start again. Whereas I've played other games where I just had a difficulty and then didn't want to come back. That doesn't happen often, but it's not something that I've experienced with Total War Warhammer 3.
Playability, I have found dozens of hours just doing this and really enjoying it. Others will surely find this approach mind-numbing and pointless. It's a game that you can approach in a ton of different ways, and it provides the experience you want. I like to play deliberately and get punished for mistakes. Some will want to throw caution to the wind and sweep across the map. Others will want to bring as many bodies to the party and smash everything in sight. I didn't come into the game expecting to play it a certain way, but I quickly found the style that I felt rewarding, and with each setback I got a little better, and I felt confident to try my luck elsewhere as far away as possible from Snitch. My very first campaign victory was with Gorrock, and while veterans of the game may scoff at this for being on the easy side, it felt like a massive hurdle. I felt accomplished, and that is the important thing. Stepping into very hard really did open the game up for me. I wanted to play deliberately and have little decisions mean something, and as I took on the easier campaigns, I felt confident to try other things, utilizing different lords, units, and strategies, going from dinosaur chomping to cannon blasting to plague spreading. Cathay was my springboard, and while I have no intention to return to Snitch's dinner table anytime soon, cycling through the factions has been deeply fun, and I know I am
Yeah, I think that's one of the best parts of the Total War Warhammer 3 is the factions are so drastically different from each other that it's almost like playing a new game when you play as a different faction, basically. It really is. Like, there are certain, like, playing the Beastmen compared to playing the Empire, like, they're so they're so drastically different from each other. I've never played a game before where the factions felt so drastically different to each other to the point that it was almost like playing a different game. So I think that's one of the best things about the Total War Warhammer 3 series is the fact that the factions are just so drastically different from each other. And because they're so drastically different from each other, it means that having an understanding of how to defeat each faction is, for instance, like if you're playing against the Orcs, right? You want to try to take them out as quickly as possible before they build a war, especially if they're at war with you, right? Or what you want to do is you want to try to weather the storm, wait for the war to fail, and then come get them, right? So because of faction mechanics like that, and or if you're playing against the vampire counts, you have to kill every single vampire. You have to kill every single lord, because if you don't kill the lords, right, the next turn they're going to have a full army and they're going to come at you again. So the thing is, because each of the legendary lords, each of the factions are so different from each other, it even requires you to adjust your play style depending upon who you're dealing with. For instance, if you're playing as the Empire and you're focusing on mainly a ranged faction, and then Vlad comes after you, because Vlad has Vanguard deployment on all his units, he can close the distance so fast that you're just not going to get a lot of time to shoot at him, right? So the combination of, it's almost like Magic the Gathering, the rules of Magic the Gathering, where it's all about having these rules and then having cards which break the rules, right? Because of the different amount of faction mechanics and the different ways that the rules interact with each other, a lot of the times you will have to adjust your strategy depending upon which faction you're playing against. Certain strategies against certain factions will just simply not work against others, so it makes the gameplay really unique.
only just scratching the surface. Now I'm exploring further, seeing more of the world and getting stuck into different ways to play in the campaign and in battle. My list of factions I am psyched to play keeps growing. I love the idea of the Vampire Coast because Flintlock Zombies is just excellent thematically. I want to try Nurgle to go deeper into the Pestilence game plan, Norska for the pillaging Viking fantasy, Wood Elves to roleplay a Forest Ranger, and Dark Elves for no particular reason. Warriors of Chaos seem like they have a bunch of compelling playstyles to explore, and Kislev is one I am excited to dive into, mostly because I am somewhat obsessed with Catherine and her voice actor Devra Wild. We have an interview segment on the channel with her about her inspiration for Catherine. It is a good watch. I will link it at the end of the video. I've got this ever-growing list of factions and campaigns I want to dive into. And on one hand, time is a factor. The other, I keep defaulting to my absolute two favorites, my MVPs that I keep coming back to. And it may be pretty basic, but dwarfs and greenskins, they are so much fun. On one side, dig deep, hold the line and settle grudges, make friends, antagonize elves, and restore your former glory. On the other, constant unending war, scrapping any chance you get, and diplomacy, sod that is Hume nonsense. Why talk when you can fight? They're polar opposites but come together like two sides of the same coin. Both have compelling playstyles that fit depending on my mood, and their campaigns and events are so thematic and oftentimes pretty damn funny. I will move on to the other factions soon enough, but I cannot get enough of these campaigns.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Like the favorite factions, like I do have like there are factions like I think there are factions that I dislike. There's not many. There's one faction that I dislike, but yeah, you do have favorite factions in this game. Like for me, I either like ranged heavy factions like the Vampire Coast or the Empire, or I also like playing as Bretonnia, even though it can get a little bit boring playing with all the knights all the time. Like really, Bretonnia has one play style. And the Vampire Counts are one of my favorite factions as well. So yeah, I totally get that. But there's so many like I said, I've played the game for over 1,000 hours, just Total War Warhammer 3 alone, right? And I still haven't played all the legendary lords. You know, in fact, I don't think I've even done a long campaign victory. But I just keep playing the game because I love it so much. So that's a lot of fun.
Even if I'm only just playing them through till the short victory conditions. I didn't mean to say short again. It really is the game of...
Yeah, short victory conditions all the way. I don't think I've ever done long victory conditions, because that's the one thing that I will say about Warhammer 3 that is a little bit on the weak side, is the end game. It can get to a point where the early game and the mid game is really interesting, but the end game is, once you've got a lot of units, you lose the variety that you had when you initially started, because the game boils down to there only being a few factions left. So then you end up with the massive push against that faction. But still, I really do enjoy the game, so...
of 1,000 lessons, many of them obvious. Tactics in battles, lord interactions, learning that you can in fact blow up your own army with spells and artillery. That was a painful lesson to learn. But there are some bigger takeaways I got from all this. The first is quite important. Don't judge a game on some false idea you've built up. I look back to how disinterested I was in Total War a few weeks ago, and how foolish was I? Second, stepping out of your comfort zone can yield massive rewards. Even when I started to get into the game, I avoided battles whenever I could, but I leaned into them, watched some videos, picked up some tactics, and put them into practice. Felt that warm fuzzy feeling you get when you learn a new trick, solidify a skill, and mow down a horde of Skaven with a massive dinosaur. Every incremental improvement adds up. I started my journey getting smashed to pieces in every battle, bottling it as soon as I had a dozen or more units to think about. Now, well, I still bottle it in particularly large battles, but I feel more comfortable with every passing conflict.
I don't necessarily think bottling is a bad thing. It's not very tactical, but sometimes if you have like a whole bunch of buff spells and debuff spells at the same time, it can really, like, when you have like so many units in an area, they all get affected by the buffs, and if there's a whole bunch of enemy units area, they get affected by the debuffs. So it's one of the safest ways to actually make use of those magic spells, and to just buff a whole bunch of units, like to just stack buffs as if it was like a JRPG.
That constant feeling of growing as a player is rewarding, and I still know there are many, many more miles to go. Most new strategy games I go into, I feel comfortable pretty quickly. Here, I am out of my depth. I am confused and slogging my way through, and I kinda love that. Now, I am not going to run through all the tricks and habits I picked up because A, this isn't that sort of video, and B, I'm not very good and I will probably tell you the wrong thing. But if you are a new player and going through this journey, I found Zerkovic's videos to be hugely helpful, though there's a ton of great Total War creators making excellent guides that helped me gain some confidence. My first 100 hours in the game went by fast. Usually with a title, that's where I would step back, let it breathe, and revisit later. But no part of me wants to stop. There's still so much to explore.
Yeah, a lot of the times I reserve like maybe a Friday night or a Saturday in order to play Total Warhammer 3. Just simply because it's one of those games that you want to probably play for a couple of hours in order to get a good play session in. It's not a game that you want to play for an hour, or if you only have 1 hour free, because you could end up in a battle that takes longer than that. But it is a fun game to play if you've got like 4 hours free and stuff like that.
And I am really excited by that prospect. But what's my next step? Well, maybe you can help me with that. Down below, drop me your favourite lords to play as and why. Help me build a shortlist for my next 100 hours. And for all that wisdom you've built up over the years, get some tips for a new player down in the comments section. And if you're like me and you've joined the party late, you're getting stuck in and wowed by this game while everyone else has been there and done that, let me hear from you too. If you've enjoyed your time here, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I am here every week with strategy content, and if you want to see more Total War stuff, let me know. I am a newcomer, but I would love to make more videos.
Alright, this was G-Man Gaming and Reviews. React video to Total War Warhammer 3 is my newest obsession. I'll put the link to GINX TV in the description below if you want to watch the original video. So please like and obviously there's a like and subscribe to GINX TV. You should like and subscribe to him if you want to. Please like and subscribe for me as well if you would like to do that. This was G-Man Gaming and Reviews. One last thing. I have 2 new channels. One is the G-Man Show and another one is One Stop Web Solutions. One Stop Web Solutions is it's basically a channel where I talk about how to marketing tips for growing your YouTube channel. Using the stuff that I've learned. Not that I'm a big YouTuber or anything, but I do know some things. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should definitely check out that channel. I recently uploaded a course on how to build a website in WordPress for free. The full course and the course files uploaded there if you're interested in that. And then we've got the G-Man Show, which is all about chivalry and all that good stuff. So yeah, please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'd love to hear your comments on who you'd like me to do a video on next, which legendary lords or factions, and see you on the next one.